Hey guys, great news. Vietnam has finally approved the 90-day, or rather 3-month tourist visa. But at what cost or what restrictions are going to come along with that? And most importantly, when can we use this visa? So today, I want to break down this visa and what to expect in Vietnam in the near future. Now, as many of you know, this whole visa process for the last couple years, it's just been a mess. It started with there was a purge of fake business visas that were being signed off by official government employees at immigration and fake businesses that were ran by Vietnamese. Then the Vietnamese government just removed all people, all visas, didn't allow anybody to stay, and gave extensions to people on tours just because of the pandemic. Then came the e-visa, but it didn't allow extensions, forcing people to actually do border runs every 30 days. And then the border runs started to get halted and randomly refused, even though people were getting approved for their e-visas before even doing the border run. So what is even going on right now? So today I want to break down these rumors, these talks about this visa, what's going on in Vietnam, and what to expect in the near future. Now, I do want to warn you, today's video is not going to be for the faint of heart. I'm going to be saying a lot of things that are going to be ultra honest. These are coming from government officials in the north and central Vietnam. These are coming from lawyers that work with immigration. And it's also going to be coming from a few friends that I know personally that work with agents and are agent companies that usually get their information 45 to 60 days early from the government when anything revolves around the immigration process itself. So we're going to be talking about some things that typical tourists and Westerners don't want to hear, but these are the facts that the government's putting down as a final rule. Before we get into this, I want to kind of lay down an example just so you understand where the Vietnamese government is coming from, because we have to truly understand where they're coming from to understand why these rules are taking so long and what their mindset is with this. We can't just assume, oh, they just sign a paper, give us a visa, everything is easy. It doesn't work that way. So let's take an example. Imagine in your town, there's this guy. He opens up this company. Who cares what it does? He just opens up this company. And he provides business permits for a bunch of random people that do not live in your country. And he offers availability that they can stay in your country or your city. There is no work guarantee. There is no money that they'll receive out of this. They just accept, the business just accepts money to bring them in, right? To make this more realistic, let's put some faces on here. Let's pick Japan. That sounds like a good country. Let's say that this company has hired a bunch of Japanese citizens. Hiring, sending them in, bringing them over, and getting them the paperwork. These Japanese fly into your country on these business permits that are approved by your immigration for some reason. Majority of them do not work. Most of them, if not all of them, do not pay any taxes whatsoever into the system that they're taking from. And when they do finally get here, most are hiding out in small houses with locals or going out to the countryside and just hiding away from the government and whatnot. Then comes tax season. The government's coming after these companies because that's what governments do. They get their tax money from these businesses, right? And this company that was sponsoring all these Japanese people to come to your country is now claiming a big zero on the tax form. And they're also stating there is no taxable income. There's also no profit, gain, or loss. There's just zero value coming into the company because that bribe money or the money for the work permit was not a profit. It was an administration fee. So now you have a bunch of people in your country not working, not providing, taking from the tax system, not paying into taxes, and you have the company kind of doing the same thing, just avoiding taxes altogether while bringing people in under a visa that is not being respected. What do you think your government's actually going to do with this? Now, if they work faster than Vietnam, they're going to take action. They're going to start putting regulations, or they're going to start removing these people if they can't prove that they're actually doing anything. But if they are like Vietnam, they're going to wait 14 to 16 years to actually do something. Unless somebody's getting a few extra something to keep their mouth shut, and this process just carries on for 15 or 16 years, which is something that we've been seeing in Vietnam for the last 14 to 16 years. But with this example, you get my point on what Vietnam government is actually seeing from their side of this picture. So anyways, with that being said, let's start breaking down this whole visa process. The most important question that people have been asking, why is this taking so long? They just need to sign a paper. There's a visa, bada bing, bada boom. I can come into Vietnam and life is good, right? It's that easy. It's not. So to understand what Vietnam's logic is when it comes to tourists come into the country. They fly in from the airports, they come from the borders. Wherever they come from, they come in. They come in, they spend their money, and they leave. Or two, somebody will come in as a skilled worker, provide a skill, spend that profit or that income salary they make in the country, and then they leave. Now, this is a big reason why it's so hard to get money out of Vietnam. If you've lived here in Vietnam, you've worked here in Vietnam, you know it's very cheap. And you start getting stacks of money. I did too. I wasn't leaving it in the bank, and I couldn't get it out of the country. And there's reasons why Vietnam does this. They don't want the money out of the country, which is a very big thing to understand. But on top of that, it's common knowledge that if you come to Vietnam, you can stay here pretty much forever. It's cheap as hell to live. And it's also common knowledge within the West, like us, is that you can come to Vietnam, live here long term, by simply doing visa runs and just hiding out somewhere. Which is something the Vietnam government is really trying to avoid, is what was happening before the pandemic, is exactly that. Border runs and hiding out. Which led us to a new law of Decree 152, which I did a lot of videos on, and I broke down this law, what it meant in English. The crux of it all was the new president voted into the South, wanted to get rid of these fake business companies. So we all heard about the purge, like get rid of the Western people and fake visas. You guys saw the Western people hating on other Western people for being in Vietnam on fake visas. But the truth is this, is those fake visas were signed by Vietnamese companies because they have to be. You can't get a business permit or visa in Vietnam without having a company associated to it. So there was a company associated to it, but there was also a Vietnamese immigration officer stamping these documents. You remember that. They would take your passport for like 2 or 3 days, drive it to immigration, get it stamped, you paid 2 or 3 million, they gave it back to you, you're good to go for 3 months, right? And this is what Decree 152 did. It was it regulated these companies. It didn't go after the Western people. It went after the source, which was the companies writing these visas. Now, if you had a visa under these companies, yeah, you pretty much had to leave. The attack wasn't at the Western people. It was directly at the Vietnamese companies. And if you see the news back in 2021, 22, the staff going to jail, owners being fined heavily, etc., etc. Then the following year, the e-visa was approved. $25, get it done online, very, very simple. And everybody was doing it. People started moving to Vietnam and just border running, hop, 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 and staying there. And then this is when the Vietnamese government started randomly, this was a very random thing, but started rejecting people coming back in on the immigration side for land border entries. Now, your e-visa might have been approved, but when you tried to jump across, they were like, you just left Vietnam like 10 minutes ago, bro. Leave. This was very random. And the reason for this is the Vietnamese government never intended for Westerners to stay in Vietnam long term as a tourist. And their laws and their actions are proving this. And again, it's a tourist visa. You get a tourist visa in any country in the world, they intend you to leave. Anywhere in Asia, you typically only have 180 days per year you can be in their country as a tourist until they're like, yo, you need to leave. Your time is up, my dude. And Vietnam really started cutting back on this. So speaking of cutting back on border run rejections, all of Southeast Asia has some type of time frame. Usually after about 180 days, the country will tell you that you've hit your limit, you need to go. Vietnam is the only country that does not have these regulations. Vietnam is the only spot you can literally just stay forever as a tourist. So over the last 18 months, it started to become a trend where people were being refused to come back into the country, and they had to wait between like 3 to 7 days to actually re-enter. Now, this is when you left, you got your exit stamp at Cambodia, Laos, and very, very randomly, the immigration officer might actually say, you just left, you need to wait 3 to 7 days to come back in, even though you had an e-visa approved. And again, this was very random. I went through a lot of videos trying to just see what Western people were going through. And I saw YouTubers talking about their second, their fifth, their 10th, their 18th time is when they finally got rejected. And I saw a few people, and I've also got emails and comments of people saying, I've never been rejected. I've been here for a year and a half. So this is very random, and there's no real reason why they're selecting certain people. I've heard Americans get rejected. I've heard Australian people get rejected. And I've also heard of Americans that have never been rejected. And there's also no, like, frame. Like, there's been people over 180 days pretty much border running into Vietnam. And this is a sign and another cue that Vietnam is trying to regulate their immigration like the rest of Southeast Asia is. Think about it. Nowhere else in Southeast Asia can you do 150 million border runs and stay in their country forever. You never could. This is why the last 16 years, Western people came to Vietnam. They didn't go to Thailand or Cambodia or Laos to do this. They came to Vietnam because there's ways to do it. There's loopholes to do it. And Vietnamese companies were helping you do it. This is where the purge came in. But speaking of visas, let's get into the marriage renewals. This is something I get asked a lot. There's not a lot of information about it, but let me give you what's been happening and kind of what we might expect in the near future with this. When it comes to Vietnam, there isn't really any talk of canceling this at all, but questions of the revalidation process is starting to come up, in these meetings and talk. This is something that's rather normal in countries like Thailand or China, for example, where you have to reevaluate your visa every year or 2 years, something like that. Now, Vietnam's always been known to not worry about this. Like, you just don't do this type of stuff. Think about it. If you have been married, you watch this video, then you understand what I'm about to say. You get married in Vietnam. You go through your whole medical process, yada, yada, yada. You get married. Paperwork is done. Documents are done. You get your 5 or 10 year TRC marriage ID card. You're good to go, right? Then you renew it. You pay the fee at immigration. Bada bing, bada boom. You're good to go. Forever in Vietnam with no large sum of money or fees, no requirements to work, no hassle. It's easy, right? But however, places like Thailand, for example, you have to go through this tedious paperwork process to get this stuff finalized. Yearly retirement visa updates. So every year in Thailand, if you have a retirement visa, you have to update and verify your income that's coming in as a retirement pension. If you're married in places like Cambodia or Thailand, you have to update and renew your yearly visa process and your resident card per se with your marriage to validate you're still married. So you're not getting married and just kind of dipping out, I guess. And in all, this is just a headache of a process that really just consists of a lot of bribing and going back to immigration 3 or 4 times every year, really. And when I think about Thailand, we just did a video about working in Thailand, what it's like to work in there. Even with your work permit, as I got a work permit in Thailand every 6 months, even though I had a 2-year work permit in Thailand, every 6 months I was required to go back and re-verify my job contract, my income, where I'm staying, and how long I plan to stay, and what skill or talent I have, pretty much validating my degree once again. Which is extremely annoying and tedious, but this is something that all of Southeast Asia kind of does to an extent, except Vietnam. Why Vietnam is starting to consider this marriage visa or any of these visas in that respect to start following this path. I personally find that it's because of this aftermath, this post-pandemic stuff going on. Vietnam is really starting to look at all their options that they're offering to people to come into Vietnam that are non-citizens. We talked about at the beginning of this video about the Japanese people coming into your country legally, but not really holding any value to your country, thus kind of just leeching rather than providing for the country. Understand, Vietnam thinks of itself as a factory country. They want to produce product and value for the world, right? That's how they make money. Once again, this takes us to the marriage thing. Think about what the Vietnam government sees when Westerners get married to Vietnamese. They tend to not spend money like a tourist. They tend to not pay for expensive hotels like they were before. There's no more wild nights on the street markets and street parties and nightlife where you're spending hundreds of dollars on beer, food, even the massages, and again, expensive hotels. And in general, just touristy kind of stuff, right? In truth, most people, they come to Vietnam, they get married, and they just start living the cheaper life. I've talked to so many people that are married in Vietnam over these last couple weeks, and every one of them say the same exact thing. We stay here because it's so cheap to live here. And this is something the government doesn't want to hear from a Western person. From a Vietnamese, sure, who cares? They live here, they're the citizens, they're farmers, they're factory workers. They're providing a service for the country, the government. But when you're a Westerner, you come out here and you just kind of sit around, which I get. You're retired. I get it. I'm with you guys. But the government's not with you. In all, this is something the Vietnamese government doesn't want from a Western tourist when they come here, to not spend money. Because that's the whole point of tourism, is to spend money. And on top of that, Vietnam is starting to see a pattern. Talking to a friend of mine today, he works within a place, we'll leave it like that, but he informed me when I asked about the whole marriage process and what they talk about. He said ideally what they see as a pattern is Western people will marry Vietnamese women. The wife has to buy the house. Obviously, the Western person can't buy a house. The spending of the Western person comes to an immediate halt. Meaning they're not spending money on stuff like we talked about before. And worst of all, a lot of these Western people pack up their stuff, they take their wives, they take their families, and they leave Vietnam forever. Like, they move back to America, Australia, Canada, wherever they came from originally. This is a horrible investment deal for Vietnam. So allowing people to come to Vietnam, get married, and then just disappear doesn't help them. Remember we talked about earlier that Vietnam doesn't allow you to really export money. So if you're a teacher, you got a couple $100 million laid around, you have to spend it in Vietnam. You can't really take $20,000, $30,000 out of the country without being sneaky about it. There's no real legal way to do it. And when you're taking your entire body and the citizens with you, this is kind of the same idea. Now, with that being said, is there going to be any changes to the marriage visa? I honestly don't think so. No, I have found no facts that the Vietnamese government's going to alter this visa at all. There's no intent. They have no talks about it, really. It just comes up, but it never gets played with. But I will tell you, during the pandemic, I had a lot of friends in Vung Tau. A lot of them owned restaurants. They were married to Vietnamese. They owned bars. They owned a lot of stuff out there. But they weren't married. This is the key part. They had a TRC. And their TRC renewals were being rejected. They were being told they need to leave. This was before, and this was during the pandemic. So was it because of the pandemic? Nobody really knows because the reasons weren't given to them. They're just saying it's expired, you have to leave. Simple as that. And being Vietnam, they can do that. So keep in mind, it is a TRC card, temporary resident card. This is not a citizenship card. So they have the ability to remove people. So thinking that this loophole is going to be forever, it's kind of a hard one to understand. But we've talked about in other videos, after like 7 years, most Western people tend to leave Vietnam anyways. And this is Vietnam's fear, is you take the whole family with you, including your money. In regards to other visas, I think 95% of us just don't care. They have nothing to do with us. Nobody is really coming to Vietnam claiming to be a lawyer, or nobody's out here trying to fake the Vietnamese bank so they can get an investor visa. And on top of that, these visas are extremely hard to get. Like, there's a huge process. I personally had to get 2 investor visas in my time living in Vietnam, and they are hell. You have to go through a lawyer, you have to go through an agent, like a real agent, an actual immigration agent. And the process is hell. You're paying bribe money. It's just nonsense. Nobody is doing that for a fake visa. So in respect to these, I don't think the government's ever even going to look at these anytime soon. Again, these visas typically deal with lawyers, investors, and diplomats. So these being faked out, I don't think Vietnam's ever really had a problem with these. At the same time, they're less than 3% of visas used in Vietnam. So this leads us back to the original problem, the tourist visas themselves, and where the Vietnamese government is truly focused on. So I want to talk about one more thing, and then we're going to get to the final part of what you need to know about this visa. And that is, many people are living in the past and don't really live in the present when it comes to Vietnam and what to expect. I feel like a lot of people are truly living in this pipe dream of the pre-pandemic Vietnam, of pretty much living here forever on business visas or long-term tourist visas, doing border runs back and forth, or just being married. And this is the past Vietnam. This is the old Vietnam. This is not a Vietnam that's going to come back. Vietnam has seen the problems, seen the flaws, and they've truly learned on how to fix this. And during this pandemic, Vietnam has been able to remove all non-essential people, tourists, business visas, marriage certificates, all that stuff. They're able to remove that and now allow people in that they want to come in here and be able to regulate even their times. So for the last 2 years, as this e-visa was rolled out, Vietnam has been able to test the process and really see how it works and what it brings in, how the tourists are acting, who's visa running, yada, yada, yada. And to give you the results, Vietnam has seen a huge increase in domestic tourism and employment from their own people getting to work and just creating stuff. And on top of that, they're able to control the flow of traffic coming in and out of the country to a majority of part. And I know many of you guys, and I've seen a lot of these emails saying that Vietnam tourism is actually down. They need tourists or they're going to crash. The whole country's going to fall apart, yada, yada, yada. I hear you. I do. But that's not the truth. Vietnam now has the ability and the know-how on how to increase and decrease those numbers, tourism, income, profits, everything. They have that ability now. All they got to do is hit a button. When this was before the pandemic, they didn't really have that process because there was too many parts involved in the process. Now, there's only one part. And if you notice, the e-visa is only allowed to be done through one site. So if you're going through an agent to do your visa to come to Vietnam right now, or the last 2 years, that agent is probably charging you like $50 or $60, and you are paid for it for some reason. But they would just go into the Vietnamese government, fill it out their website, and getting the approval, and then forwarding it to you. That's all they were doing. But the point of this allowed the government to control who came in and came out. So it didn't matter if the agent did it or not. The Vietnamese government in Hanoi still had the final say on who was approved. And when it comes to these tourists, Vietnam truly doesn't see a value of Western people living here long term with the title of being retired or married. There's just no value. And we've talked about this already on why they feel that way. And on top of that, let's just talk about us as Western people. There's no real laws that allow us to own land as non-citizens. You literally have to pay your new wife to buy the land. And if you divorce her, you're going to lose all that money. Sorry, the government is not going to favor a non-citizen over property rights. There's also no pension plan. So if you do work out here as a teacher and you decide to retire, you're not going to get anything. There's no pension, there's no 401ks, there's no IRS refund checks. There's none of that. And on top of that, if you get hurt out here, if you get sick, if you get any kind of illness or surgery requirement, insurance plans in Vietnam are very far from few. Your international ones barely cover anything. And that's if you even get past all the bribe money and red tape that you got to get there to even get anything done out here. And since we're on this negative trade, let's get on to driving. Like, you can't even drive out here, drive a car out here without getting harassed consistently. And for you guys that are getting married out here, you always run into the two same problems. One, the marriage loophole, which it technically is starting to get reevaluated and reconsidered month after month. There hasn't been any actions or talk about changing it, but it is in the view of the government right now on what they should do with it. And number two, the most important one, no matter how hard we try, we will always be seen as outsiders. We will never be part of the Vietnamese community. We will never be part of the system. You will never vote for anybody. You will never be part of whatever you want to be. Even to this day, I've grown up in a Vietnamese community my entire life. This is how I know so much. This is how I know the people I know. I have grown up. I have connections back in America, all the way to Vietnam. And I still get asked the same stupid questions when I go out to these Vietnamese parties and these government official parties and these weddings. Oh, you can use chopsticks? And honestly, if you are doing visa runs month after month for 6+ months, you are part of the problem and why Vietnam is starting to look at it and find a way to stop and regulate it. This is what they're trying to stop. And really, if you've been out here for 12+ months doing the same thing, it just, to me, it seems wild. It's overly expensive because you're paying for visas in another country just to jump back here. It's time consuming out of hell. And really, it's expensive. So Vietnam being so cheap, sure. But does it really balance out after you pay all these visa costs and whatnot? And you got to think, when you're going through Cambodia, for example, or Laos, you're getting a whole page visa stamp. This is filling passports fast, right? So on top of that, you have to pay for new passports every year or two, right? So with that being said, let's get to the meat of this video, the 90-day visa and what to expect. So this new e-visa is a 90-day, 3-month tourist visa. It's expected to come out August 15th of this year. The process itself has been approved, but it hasn't been finalized, meaning that there's still some paperwork on how they're going to roll it out and what's going to happen. What we know so far, though, it is going to be an e-visa. So when you go to the government website, notice where they're making you go. The government website, they're going to give you the option of a 30-day tourist visa or a 3-month tourist visa. Honestly, I don't think the e-visa is ever going to go away. Every country in Asia is using it now, and it allows these countries to have control over who comes in and who comes out. Even with the e-visa process we talked about earlier, where people are getting approved but rejected at the borders, there's going to be a point where you're going to apply for a new e-visa to do your border run, and it's going to tell you no. And this is the power that the government wants to keep. So for the Vietnamese government to get rid of the e-visa process, I am 99.999% sure that they are going to keep this process. One, it allows them to collect all the money. You pay $25, you're done. They get everything. There's no agent in the middle. There's no bribe money. It's just they get the money, everything's good. And number two, and most importantly, they're allowed to say, okay, we have currently 50,000 tourists in our country right now. We're going to go to reject people for the next 3 weeks until people start leaving and we can regulate this. So Vietnam now has that control. And again, we talked about earlier, with tourism going down, that's fine. The Vietnam government does not care because they know if they open up the border to tourists, it will flood. So Vietnam government is not worried about it. Vietnam is actually one of the hottest destinations to go in Southeast Asia. And it's been that way for the last 12 years. And they know this, but now they can control it. And plus, bringing back the VOA, it's going to be that they're going to have to hire new people. They're going to have to bring back all this paperwork. And they're going to have to do trading that, honestly, they don't trade out here. Worst of all, they're going to start having agents and business people starting to find loopholes to kind of circumvent the actual government and benefit the Western people for tips and bribe money, right? Something that the Vietnamese government originally was fighting against. On a good note, and personally, I do feel the VOA is going to come back in due time, but I think it's going to be only sent to the airports. So when you fly into Saigon, Da Nang, I believe, and Hanoi, you'll be able to do a VOA at some point. I don't feel that they're going to do it at the borders, like the walking borders. Understand, between 10 to 12% of people that cross those borders, all the borders combined that are land, 10 to 12% of them back in, let me check, 2018 to 2020 were tourists, new tourists. So this means 80 to 85% of people crossing that border were visa runners. Vietnam is, again, trying to avoid this. You're in here for 30 days, you spend all your money, you get out. That's the point of the tourist visa, and that's what they want to keep in point. So a VOA going to the borders, It could happen. I'm not saying it won't. I think Mokbai would be one that would get it before anybody. But I don't, there's just no logic to it. For what Vietnam government's been trying to do for the last couple years, it doesn't seem to make sense for them to do it. But again, I could be wrong. Vietnamese government loves to change the rules. They like to re-vote. They like to altercate stuff week by week. So everything said today could be completely different next week. But as of now, I just don't see it happening. The e-visa is here to stay. The new 3-month visa is an e-visa, so it kind of shows there. And in regards to renewing that e-visa, there are no renewal talks at all for any e-visa. So I'm thinking what's going to happen here is they're going to do the 30-day e-visa, you stay, and then you're going to have to do this visa run process. Which brings us to this idea, are they going to adopt the 180-day rule that all of Asia does? Meaning you do 4 visa runs and then they tell you can't come back anymore. Vietnam sees this. Why wouldn't they follow this? But on a positive note, the Decree 152 rule that I keep talking about, I did a video about this last year where I broke it down in basic English on what it means. But one of the benefits in this decree is if you have a tourist visa, you get a job, you start teaching, you're an engineer, whatever it is, your company, the school, the agent, whoever is working on your immigration papers can now convert that tourist visa to a business visa without you having to leave the country. This is huge. This is awesome. Remember back in the day, you had a tourist visa, you got a job at ILA or EMG or something like that. And you're like, oh, I'm excited. I'm going to get a work permit. And they're like, yeah, you are. But you need to go to Cambodia and come back. So I hope you have $100 to spend. You don't have to do that no more. And the process is free. And again, this is reducing the visa run process on itself. And remember, we talked about the beginning of this with the whole business and the Japanese thing. Business owners were being fired. They were going to jail, or they were just kind of like disappearing because of this whole fake business visa process. The government knows what's happening, and they're starting to take serious action on it. If you go onto Google and search up Vietnam Times and some other local newspapers from back in 2020, there are countless articles about companies that were providing fake visas being fined, shut down, or owners just going to jail because it was illegal. But it wasn't the Western's fault. They were just paying the money and getting a passport stamp. Somebody was approving this. That's why I say the Western purge, it wasn't a Western purge, it was a Vietnamese company purge. So in general, they're not going to repeat this process. Enjoy the e-visa. This is pretty much where it's going to stay. Visa runs are still in the question, what's going to happen there. But as of now, August 15th, we will have a way to stay in Vietnam for 3 months without having to worry about month-to-month visa runs. And also, I've been getting emails and comments on the videos about the 6 and 12-month visa. Now, do keep in mind, this is an American-only visa. And honestly, it would surprise me if they brought this back. And it really wasn't that great. If you guys ever had the 12-month tourist visa, you still had to leave every 3 months to get the stamp renewed. It was ridiculous. It was stupid. I don't know why they did that, but it's what they did. If you have any questions or concerns, do leave the comments below. I'll answer them as fast as I can for you guys. Till then, I will see you again.